Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at Oregon's gubernatorial race for this fall's midterm elections and breaking down the possibility of a viable third-party challenge in Betsy Johnson, and we'll get to her a little bit later on in the video. So we'll be taking a look at that, as well as the Republicans and Democrats' chances to obviously win this state. I'll probably do a more detailed videos on other states as we go on through the midterms, and obviously they'll be updated as we get closer. That's why a lot of times on my gubernatorial predictions I'll put a date at the end of it, because sometimes I plan to anyway do a more solid prediction. Come October I'll probably be releasing more specific predictions for the various states, both on the gubernatorial level and the Senate level. So looking at Oregon in 2022, we have a very interesting matchup because on the Democratic side there's no heir apparent. I mean, most people think that the Oregon Speaker of the House, Tina Kotek, is probably going to be the nominee. That's why I put her on the cover of this video. But we also have Tobias Reed, who's the state treasurer, and a bunch of other lesser known Democrats on this list. I really think the primary will be between these two individuals, one of which, the Speaker of the House, she has never won a statewide race before. Tobias Reed, being the treasurer, obviously has. But in terms of backing, the former Speaker Kotek has a lot more endorsements than Tobias Reed. Now, endorsements don't mean a whole lot these days, but I think in a primary they probably do, especially when you have a lot of state reps and unions and various, in this case for a Democrat, left-wing organizations endorsing you. That's a pretty good sign, and it kind of gets your name out there, and it makes things a lot easier for you to win the primary. So as of right now, it looks like Kotek is the favorite to be the Democratic nominee. Of course, on the Republican side, we really only have one poll, and the person leading that poll is a guy by the name of Bud Pierce. He was the nominee back in the 2016 gubernatorial race, in which he was able to get 43.5% of the vote compared to Kate Brown's just 50.7%. And for whatever reason, Kate Brown never was able to get over 50% of the vote in Oregon. She never got to 51 or anything higher, so of course, she won in the 2016 special election, and then going on to 2018, she won that race by an even lesser margin. And again, this was a blue wave year, and we'll talk about these races a little bit more later in the video. But, Bud Pierce was able to outperform Trump by around 4 points. Donald Trump only got 39% of the vote in the state of Oregon, while you have Bud Pierce getting around 43%. So, this also could be that he ran a more moderate campaign, I guess. In Oregon, you kind of have to be a Republican. Same in 2018, the nominee Bueller for the Republican Party did run a more moderate campaign, although I would say he didn't run a sort of Charlie Baker campaign, but he definitely avoided things like Trump and all that, and Bud Pierce was kind of the same way, and tended to work out better for him, although neither candidate could make it over the finish line. So we have him as the presumptive Republican nominee. We really don't have any other polls. We don't really have any other information. This is all we really have to go off of. Also, the field is really, really big. We have tons of candidates. There's definitely over a dozen people running on the Republican side. So even somebody like Bud Pierce could easily win this primary with as little as 20% of the vote or something, if it really comes down to it. But I think he'll probably win by more. Unless another Republican has a real breakout and, decides to, is able to become viable through a good campaign or something like that. But as of now, I think it's likely a matchup, at least on the Republican and Democratic side, between Tina Kotek and Bud Pierce. And then moving on, of course, to the independents. Now, independent and minor party candidates running in Oregon are not new at all. We could go back just to the 2016 race I showed you. We had the independent share of the vote making up, over 5-6% of the vote. We go back to 2018, same thing, independents, libertarians, they take up a larger share of the electorate than they do in most states. I guess Oregon just has that more independent nature. Again, even in the solid red and solid, less so in solid blue Portland, but in the rest of the state, third parties tend to get, anywhere from 2 to 4%, and, in some cases they get even higher than that. So this isn't anything new for the state of Oregon, but what is new is the major independent candidate, Betsy Johnson, actually seems to be gaining a lot of momentum in this race. She's got a lot of endorsements. She's got endorsements from some Democrats and some Republican donors even have been donating to her campaign. So she is a very interesting character because she is kind of some people have dubbed her the Joe Manchin of Oregon. She kind of was one of the Democratic state senators when the Democrats had a slim majority, I believe, in around 2014, 2016, that sort of era. She kind of stalled a lot of the more, left-wing progressive legislation from being passed in the state of Oregon. Now, Oregon, which, is typically a very left-wing state, that would be seen, of course, as a negative by some, but of course by Republicans and even some moderate Democrats, it's seen as a positive, particularly on economic issues, because Betsy Johnson is essentially an economic conservative, I guess you could say, and socially liberal. So she kind of is filling in that middle lane. Obviously, the Democratic nominee is probably going to be very left on both of those issues, and the Republican nominee is probably going to be more right on both those issues. So she kind of occupies a sort of middle lane. It'll be interesting to see where she's able to go from here, because she is a very well-known state senator. She's been in state government for decades. She's a very big name, actually, and there's one of the reasons why I don't think we have any hypothetical polls with her. We do. We have one. There's actually another we're going to look at that was just conducted more recently, but she's getting 11% of the vote. Now, this share of this poll I don't really think is terribly reliable. There's a very large number of undecideds, and obviously that's going to be the case when you're in March of the election year. I mean, we have many months to go before this race, but with Betsy Johnson getting a whole 11% of the vote, even considering the fact that independents tend to be overpolled sometimes, third-party candidates tend to do better than they actually end up doing, that's still a pretty good showing. Somebody who's able to get 10% of the vote really could swing this race one way or the other. Again, we're talking about a year when, if we go back to 2020, we're talking about a state that went for Biden plus 16, and then a state that usually goes around D plus 7, not D plus 7 national environment, but, typically the margin in the state, that only goes for Democrats by around 7 points in the past two gubernatorial races. And again, these were races in which the Democrat carried the state by a decent amount more. Again, these were during blue years for both of these states, arguably. Again, in 2016, even though Trump won the presidency and did better in the popular vote than somebody like Romney, or in terms of margin, he still did worse in the state of Oregon. Romney was able to get, I believe, about 42% of the vote in Oregon, actually, in 2012. So this was definitely a downgrade. Obviously, if you had a more Romney-esque Republican, I think, at least in the state of Oregon, he probably would have gotten a higher margin. Not so much the rest of the country, though. So a lot of interesting factors at play with the state of Oregon. Again, Biden's unpopularity is going to play a huge role in, which way Oregon swings. Obviously, I think it's going to swing to the right. So that being, also we don't have a Democratic nominee, it's very likely that Republicans could see a pickup opportunity. Now, Betsy Johnson here is really sort of a, we don't know who she's going to take more votes from. Presumably Democrats, because she is a Democrat, but then again, there could be, and there are some Republican donors and such that are actually voting for her, that are putting their support behind her, because I guess they think that a Republican isn't viable in Oregon, so they want a more moderate Democrat to run, which I think is a miscalculation, because given, again, the national environment, it's very likely that we could see a Republican flip. And I think Betsy Johnson's entry into the race can make that even more so of a reality, because she might be able to steal more votes from moderate or conservative Democrats that live, outside of Portland, let's say. So it already is going to be an interesting matchup between her and the major parties. So when we look at some of the polls with her that were conducted recently, obviously generic Democrat, generic Republican poll, and Johnson, which is the one of the ones we looked at, the Democrat gets 31%, Republican gets 22%, and 11% for Johnson. We took a look at that poll earlier, but they followed up with other questions talking about they inserted some of her policy positions. So they said, she thinks Oregons deserve better than, excesses from both the extreme left and right. This got her actually a much higher percentage. She got 30% in this hypothetical poll, a generic Dem 24 and generic Republican 17. So by asking the people that were polled that question, they tended to be a lot more favorable of her. Now, they have another follow-up, I think. Yeah, when they went into more of her legislative record, they said she was a centrist, pro-choice on abortion, more conservative on economic issues. She placed last, but she, again, was pretty much in line with the Republican, 21% Johnson, 22% for a Republican, 29% for a Democrat. So what this poll really shows that it is really if Betsy Johnson is able to get her name out there via fundraising, and that seems to be kind of happening now with Republican donors kind of donating to her, she tends to do a lot better than otherwise. So, there are some political analysts that think that she has the potential to be, an actual viable third party, as in there's a slight chance she could actually win the governor's race. I wouldn't go that far yet. I think it is still early. Obviously, she has room to grow, and perhaps you could see a actual three-way race between a Democrat, a centrist, and a Republican in the state of Oregon. But I think as of right now, it's obviously too early to tell. But it is a very interesting matchup because as far as I'm aware, there's no other state where we have a viable third-party challenge, or at least a potentially viable third-party challenge that could potentially get an independent governor. Could Oregon get an independent governor? Maybe if the Democrats nominate the wrong candidate, certainly. Again, you also have to contest that I don't know how many Republicans would be willing to cross the aisle and vote for Betsy Johnson. If not many are, then you could almost say this is a gift to the Republican Party that really, if they just play their cards right, similar to how Republicans did in Virginia, they could eke out a victory here. Now, obviously, Virginia didn't have the big third-party factor, but you could potentially see a huge upset in the state of Oregon because of this third-party presence. And, there are some Democrats that aren't happy with Betsy Johnson running in this race because they're well aware of the fact that she has the potential to take votes away from the Democratic nominee. But nonetheless, she's obviously hoping to take equally from both because, so far it seems like she actually wants to win this race. So it'll be an interesting matchup to see. Now, obviously, I'm going to make a follow-up on this as we get more polls out of Oregon. But this definitely is one of the more exciting races in the country that isn't really a toss-up because we have a third party. I'm interested to see how well Betsy Johnson does in future polling and whether or not she can actually be considered viable in this governor's race. So obviously, we'll follow up on that in some future videos. So anyway, guys, thank you all for watching this video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.